But of a truth, the election was held, but it was marred with extreme violence.
This is not war. This is Nigeria on election day. The 2019 general elections held much promise for Nigeria as the country's sixth general elections since a return to democratic rule in the year 1999. The years leading to the 2019 election saw a massive turnout of Nigerians registering with the Electoral Commission to obtain their permanent voters' cards. By 2019, over 80 million Nigerians had registered to vote. 72 million of them obtained their permanent voters' cards and were therefore eligible to cast their vote. These record registration numbers raised optimism for the 2019 election day voter turnout. Many people expected that the voter turnout in 2019 would shatter the existing voter turnout record. However, on the day of Nigeria's presidential elections in 2019, only about 30% of the registered voters came out to cast their vote, an outcome that marked the lowest voter turnout on record in the history of Nigeria's democracy.
There was a lot of flaws in the process, in the 2019 election process. We had thought that as much as 2015 election was more like a transitional governance election, 2019 would even be better because we saw some level of accountability in the 2015 elections, but 2019 elections took us aback.
I tried to get my voter's card. I registered on the units in an estate in Mile 2. When I went back to get my voter's card, I was told that the unit doesn't exist again. So tried to inquire, how am I going to get my voter's card? No lead, just ended there. I went back home.
In this organization, about 6 people couldn't vote, not because they did not want to vote, but because they had done their youth service in various parts of the country and registered to vote in those places. One of them tried to transfer his registration to Lagos, and the registration got missing along the way.
My PVC was found for me by someone in Abuja. I happened to be in Abuja for an event, and she sent me a DM like, oh, your PVC was on the way to Kaduna. I'm like, how? I'm in Lagos, And she said, oh, I'm a fan. I can bring it to you. She works in INEC, and that's how I got my voter's card. I mean, when I ran for office in 2014, I put it in Calabar, but then I wanted it changed back to Lagos, and I'd written several letters. Nothing was said until this lady now brought me my voter's card. That was how I got it. I can't imagine so many other people who were just disenfranchised from the whole process.
Physically challenged voters do not have access to all polling units. For my unit, there was no problem, but we have issues in other polling units.
Even though Mr. President popularly declared that anybody who caused electoral violence should be shot aside, even though it's not part of the Electoral Act, but as a president, he gave that instruction.
I am going to warn anybody who thinks he has enough influence in his locality to lead a body of facts to snatch boxes or to disturb the voting system. He will do it at the expense of his own life.
And nobody was arrested, nobody was prosecuted, nobody was brought to court up to today that I'm talking to you.
It was really an ugly experience, but because a lot of people were disenfranchised, a lot of people could not cast their vote, and that was what happened that day in a nutshell.
When it comes to elections, it cuts across from the foundation, which is sensitization purpose, to even getting people registered and then enabling them to be able to cast their votes, counting those votes, dealing with the sensitive materials that needs to go in there for the elections, and finally collating and publishing the results or certifying those results. Addressing this requires a targeted approach for each of these things. From how we design the messaging that goes out to notify people about elections, about the candidates who need or who are trying to get into those different positions, and about how to carry out registration, dealing with inclusion, for example, dealing with people with disability as an example, or figuring out how to craft the message to deal with the different kinds of people or characters or literacy of people across the country.
Many issues contributed to the low voter turnout, and none of them was new. Chief among them was the last-minute postponement of the elections by the Electoral Commission, citing logistical difficulties.
Now, Nigerians were supposed to be heading to the polls today to choose a new president. But in a shock move, the election was postponed just a few hours before voting was scheduled to start, and polling stations remain shut.
Every election, and this is the magic that you learn when you're involved, it's twofold. One, every election has been postponed. And, going up to these elections, everything, the word coming down from INEC, and everybody was like, listen, everything is good. The government was like, elections are going to hold. It's not going to be postponed. And we kept kind of watching it to say, are they still, because everybody, it's always postponed, right? So, but usually maybe it's like a week before or 2 weeks before, or, there's some sort of lead time.
We did a survey, especially in markets in Lagos and Abuja, before the close of registration in early February. And we found that 85% of the people who we surveyed had registered. But the key thing was that many of them actually did that Nigerian thing of going to their ancestral areas to register to vote, rather than in the areas that they live. And we see this attitude in things like the census. In the 2006 census, a lot of people actually left where they were residents to go to their ancestral homes to be counted there.
People took time off of school. Young people took time off of school. My brother, who lives in the States, left America and scheduled a mini vacation to be here during election weekend just so that he could participate and be involved and all of that. So people had made all kinds of travel plans. And, you kind of have to vote where your card is registered and all of that. And then at 3 a.m. in the morning, they tell us the elections are going to be postponed.
States have gotten their materials. Some states are yet to get their materials. So by the time they conduct the election, and some state materials yet to be arrived. So what will you say? So it better let INEC leave it till next week.
It's very disappointing. It's very disappointing. It's very shameful indeed as a Nigerian.
By the time the postponed elections came around, many people did not go. So that in itself helped to depress turnout as well, vis-a-vis registration numbers. The postponement by a single week. If it had been postponed by, say, 2 or 3 weeks, it may have been different because people would have had some extra time to recover.
You can't do that. You can't wait another whole week or whatever. So a lot of people will just go back home and be like, listen, I did the best that I could, and I couldn't be involved. The other thing that it does is that it severely harms independent candidates. So people like myself who are in fringe parties, who are not part of the major parties, who clearly don't have an unlimited supply of funds. So, the night before elections, everything is going out. All the t-shirts, the last money in the account, everything that you've got is, you're putting everything out there just like, listen, we're at the finish line now.
So basically, when you have those kind of things, the logical solution will actually be to enshrine the election dates or the election day, as is done in the US. The election day in the US is first Tuesday of November.
The other thing, which is kind of a tough lesson to learn for people who are coming into politics, and these are only things that you really learn when you are involved in it, is that the election day itself, the process of voting, is actually just the starting point, because the magic then begins to happen after the votes have been cast.
When people go out and they queue for hours, they put their votes in for their preferred candidates. If they don't protect the vote up till the votes are counted and also the numbers are imputed in the INEC register, there's no guarantee that that person you voted for is the person that will emerge the winner.
Nigeria's electoral process continues to be defined by several irregularities, which are often heightened by logistical, structural, and technical issues, resulting in many Nigerians unable to cast their votes. Perhaps the most sinister contributor to the low voter turnout during the 2019 general election was the spate of electoral violence, which unfortunately features heavily during election cycles in Nigeria.
In many places, people were afraid of turning out because they didn't want violence. They didn't want to be affected by possible violence during the elections. In which case, it wouldn't be correct to call that apathy. It will just be voter fear.
It's not the electoral system itself that enables a form of violence. It's the rewards of political office. So the rewards of being in political office in Nigeria are just too great. I mean, if I were a senator, for example, I'll be one of the richest men in the country. So those rewards for people who, in reality, when you look at the quality of debate in the National Assembly, for example, or in state assemblies, you find what comes to mind is that so many of them, not all of them, there are some of them who are actually very intelligent men, but so many of them do not have any transferable skills. So there were different types of violence, and the violence happened depending on the area. So let's start with, say, the far northeast. In Borno, most of the violence was conducted by the insurgency, Boko Haram, ISWAP. They had said that people should not come out to vote, and a few days before the presidential elections, they killed quite a number of people.
The Islamic State on Wednesday claimed responsibility for an attack on the convoy of the Borno State Governor Kassim Shettima, who was headed to a rally in northeastern Nigeria ahead of Saturday's presidential election.
As early as morning, people start coming to queue. My organization, DAG, we dispatch over 500 election observers. Some of us are in the field, and we have seen what is happening. And before you know, there's this disenchantment of people who are denied to vote, particularly when you are not voting to the particular ruling party. You are denied to cast your vote. Some people were attacked. Some people are macheted, and at the end, there's a lot of violence here and there.
To mun gama mun zo yin hada result. So da aka irga point din PDP ya fi na APC yawa a wurin a wannan akwatin namu. Shi ma da muka faɗa aka irga sai suka dauki abu suka ce ba za su yi ba. Sai an ƙara irgawa again. Sai muka ƙara. To sai na APC suka ce ba su yi ba. Sai suka rubuta suka ce suna son wannan point din da aka samu da PDP. Kwashe shi ne da shi APC. Sai na ce musu wannan abu zai yi ba saboda mu a yanda aka karantar da mu aikin abu ba a ce mana ne haka. Sai muka fara samun matsala da su har ɗaya daga cikin ke cewa zai bare ni ba da gaba sai ɗaya ne sai ce kawai in ta ƙi yadda ku sa wa shegi ya ku yanka ta in kuka yanka ta ai za a yi abu ko da bayan ne ba ta isa ta na ba abin da kuke so.
Shine sai wani sai ya zo gabana sai yake cewa ko da tsiya sai kin sa wa APC. Sai na zo daidai dangwale na sai takarda na ɗauko zan dangwala sai wani ya zo ce sa wa APC na ce ba za a sa ba. Ra'ayinka ko ra'ayina sai cewa sai kin sa na ce ba zan sa ba. To akwai jami'an tsaro a lokacin sai na ce yalla wai kana ji wai ya ce na sa wa APC. Sai buɗe bakinsa sai ya ɗauke kansa ya yi haka. Kai waye yalla ban kenan sai ce kai waye nan. Bai kalli wannan mai laifi ba sai ya ɗauke kansa kai cewa kai waye nan ni da nake mace har na fi yi zabi. Dan sanda a wannan lokaci sai ce na ce sai na sa ina sawa na dangwala gwamnan Kano na dangwala PDP kenan da dan majalisa ne da mun ta gwamnan Kano na dangwala na takardu guda biyu na zo cikin akwati na sa guda ɗaya zan sa ta kawai sai wannan ya ja hijabi na ta nan wannan ya ja hijabi na ta nan kawai daga kai nan sai ya je ga ƴan uwansa maza sun fi su 20 kowanne dukkan su sun yi ɗaya da rabi na a tsayi buɗe ido da zan yi sai na ga abin kamar a mafarki haka sai aka yi haka da gariyo wani abu kamar wilin keke suna haka da adda ya giya a pdp a gwanda ma sassara ta mu ebo an ji cikin ta mi gunduwa da ita sai abin irin kamar ko numfashi na ne ya dauke sai na nemi hankali na rasa.
In the coalition center, we have seen it went viral. What's happened? The deputy governor, the local government chairman, the commissioner of police, they went there, they disrupt the counting of draw and the rest. High-profile government officials, and this is a video. It went viral. Nobody ever was seen it.
Further south, in the southeast and southwest, a lot of the violence was conducted by state-backed organizations such as the military and the police. Especially in river states, where in the city of Abonema, in the town of Abonema, a lot of the violence was conducted by people who were reported to be wearing military uniforms.
But of a truth, the election was held, but it was marred with extreme violence. Lots of persons lost their lives. There was sporadic shooting from the both ends. Both ends, I mean the both rival party groups. If you go to Abonima, go to Jack's compound, you will see a boy called Daiwil. He was shot. And unfortunately, he could not be rushed out of the community because the security didn't allow anybody to go out. They were working with the opposition. So at that point, everybody ran. And it was only one group of persons, one party supporters that were left at the rack center, okay? So when everybody ran, they had their field day. Now, when everybody ran, there was no PDP person to monitor materials again. So the PDP boys felt the APC people wanted to hijack the material to go and fill the results. At that point, they don't have any option. They cannot fight the military. What they did was to set barricade at every exit point so that people will not, all the security or the army will not escort the materials out. At that point, there was a van that was coming into the town because the rack center was somehow off the town. You would drive in from one end to the other. So they were driving in from the other end, maybe going to their own security post or whatsoever. It was a military van. But unfortunately, one of the army men was shot by unknown persons. Up to date, if you go to Abonima, nobody will tell you that the person that shot that army man has been identified. Nobody knew who shot him, but he was shot dead. I think he was a lieutenant from the formation we gathered, a young lieutenant. So at that point, the military got very, very upset. They started shooting sporadically at anything moving, any object moving, they shoot. And that was where a lot of persons lost their lives.
So it was that bad that people had to jump into the river.
I am giving an eyewitness account of what happened in Odego precisely in Emoha local government in the election. But though we saw that in the rack center, especially in that morning where ad hoc staff were preparing for the elections, there was some problem because some youth came into the rack center, and we are telling ad hoc staff, telling them not to come to their areas. And we are surprised. Police were there with their vans, and these boys were coming with they were like mobs coming with different things. Anyway, there was no guns, but they were coming with stones and sticks, and giving such threatening in the front of Nigerian police, and nothing was done. And some policemen declined from moving to their centers because there are some level of security that goes with ad hoc staffs.
In the Southwest, which is where we are, most of the violence was conducted by non-state actors, typically touts, and they were conducted in certain areas. The pattern of violence, if you juxtapose registration patterns and actual turnout and accreditation patterns, it appeared that the pattern of violence was conducted in such a way as to suppress the votes, not to outrightly declare votes, to outrightly prevent people from voting, but to suppress the votes in certain parts of different parts of the country.
So on election day, but before the eve of the election, some group of people approached myself and my friend and asked us not to come close to the polling unit, that they were going to disrupt the election. And that if we dare come close to the polling unit, that we'll go home with an injury. So we thought it was a child's play. We came to, cast our vote on the election day, that's the Presidential and National Assembly election. Unfortunately, while the process was ongoing, some group of persons came and disrupted the whole process, and it became very violent, such that some persons sustained injury. Those security agents came along in the long run, but before they could come, the process had already been disrupted. Some materials were actually destroyed. I used to have a video of it. I had to record it, and I posted it on Twitter where I copied some, security agents. But then it was really an ugly experience, but because a lot of people were disenfranchised, a lot of people could not cast their vote, and that was what happened that day in a nutshell.
Electoral irregularities such as manipulation of votes and opacity around the result transmission processes continue to undermine public confidence in Nigeria's elections.
In all other states, their police commission were allowed to discharge their responsibility. But in Kano, they sent a whole DIG. And we asked, what happened? There's no crisis, there's no conflict, there's no electoral violence. Why would you say a whole DIG and trade to come and took over from the CP his official responsibility? From there, we start to suspect something fishy is about to happen.
What I will say as the final point on this question is the integrity of the electoral list itself. We know it has improved considerably, but we also know that in the run-up to the 2019 elections, religious organizations in particular were putting a lot of pressure on their members to go and register. Many people who had registered previously registered a second time for the 2019 election. And that would have inflated the numbers in the electoral list. And for all these issues, therefore, it's always very difficult to be affirmative about apathy and low voter turnout.
The atmosphere was not really interesting because it has actually went further to discourage people. Because even the governorship election, the turnout was very low. Because people actually came with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm to cast their vote for the presidential election. So that violence actually deterred a lot of people from coming out to vote during the governorship election. And that actually resulted to voter apathy.
I don't think that the entire electoral process is designed for accountability. I mean, there is a focus on designing the process to look credible, particularly to international observers and then to local observers. But in terms of delivering an end-to-end accountability process, where people will be held accountable if there's a deviation from what the process was designed to do. The process is not designed for that. So you find that in a lot of situations when there's election malpractice and things are done in ways that they're not supposed to be done, there isn't a lot of accountability. You can't pinpoint an election stakeholder who we can hold responsible for something not being where they are supposed to be.
And of course, with the many tribunals, the investigations, it's a whole tedious and cumbersome process. We just need to be able to simplify it because People will get tired. They'll be like, here we go again. Another one bites the dust. But we need to not have apathy as voters. If we really want change in this country, we need to stick it out till the very end.
Apathy is actually probably one of our biggest opponents as a country, because I think people have kind of been used to things being so bad for so long that there is a certain amount of belief that things can never change. And what people don't realize is that you're playing into the hands of people who do want to rig elections when you sit out of the process.
In the units, the maximum is 500 votes. And the minimum is about 200 to 300 voters. But they cannot get more than 50 people coming out, queuing up for vote. But at the end, that 500 or 300 votes in that unit will be counted. How come?
INEC at its core is the primary electoral body, and so their responsibilities are quite vast. They cover a lot from collation to logistics, range of issues. Players like STAIRS and even any other organization that gets involved, they have a very limited scope. It's very, very focused. So if you look at, for instance, international monitoring teams, they don't need to worry about logistics. They don't need to worry about ballot boxes getting there or getting snatched. They're just there to observe. And I think that makes it significantly easier to do. So almost, it's not about sort of, changing the responsibility of INEC, but it's just appreciating that INEC does have quite a lot on its plate.
INEC has like tons of time, a period of time to make sure that the whole process is seamless. But in 2020, voting shouldn't be that hard.
I disagree with INEC when they say they are powerless. The Electoral Act empower even the presiding officer to ask the security to take anybody out. But that day, even the presiding officer, the media people, the civil society, people, voters were attacked. And the security were there standing, watching. They took their head away. It's a reality.
Is INEC independent in the real sense of it? Do they have forces that actually control or influence INEC? Because again, if you want to enjoy the dividends of democracy, the first pillar is the process that brings in a politician into public office. If that process itself has a lot of loophole, then of course the politician can as well get away with anything, because if he or she can influence how they get into public office, they can as well say, well, I am here serving my own mandates, not the mandate of the people, and which defeats the purpose of democracy. So for me, we have an opportunity to look at how can we reform INEC as an institution holistically. So we're not even talking about just logistics and electoral management, because again, election is just one aspect of what INEC is supposed to do. You have voter education, you have stakeholders engagement, you have so many other things. You have research, you have data collection, you have registration of voters, you have printing of voters' cards.
INEC should be empowered to prosecute. One. Secondly, the security agents, their conduct during election must be observed. We need to have a situation room for the security agency conduct during election.
Military men or policemen, I don't see how they help matters over election matters, because they are only working for who pay them and work in line with the political parties, talks and courting points. That is what they stand for. So even if as an elector I come to meet an army man or policeman and complain of what I observe, it's like putting yourself in a problem that you are instigating the problems there.
While the use of technology in the recent elections of 2015 and 2019 represent a promising shift in the direction for the country, there's still much ground to cover.
Having it digital, we can find a way to make it digital instead of making people queue in the sun for hours or on end, and make it an easier process. It can be better, like make it transparent, involve more people. I'm sure there are a lot of people with ideas.
Technology can be very helpful from a very specific perspective, which is just removing the amount of friction in the elections. I think that's one thing that I felt was very, very common. So we still tell ourselves that, we should vote and we should deal with all the challenges of election because we want to be patriots. So, it's your right to vote, go out there. But voting isn't made easy by the realities of the actual day. And so there's lots of friction.
So Connected Development got accredited to observe elections in the state of Colorado in the US. And we learned so many things. The electoral system is heavily technology-based, so it's heavily digitalized. What does this mean? A lot of people can vote via mail. When you vote, the results are transmitted electronically. So you cannot easily manipulate the system. And the electoral official of the state of Colorado, like the INEC chairman, took us around the tour, show us the hardware system, the software, and took us through the entire process and how they come about results and how they collate this result. Because if you look at elections in Nigeria, how do they rig the election? It's at the collation centers.
Electronic voting can take so many different forms and shapes. It could be as simple as there's still a physical ballot paper and it's thumb printed and eventually scanned, dropped in a box that automatically scans what has been captured. That is one form of electronic voting. The most understood or common version of electronic voting is that there's a screen somewhere where you go and you tap the candidate you want to vote for, you tap the position you want to vote for, and your vote is cast and saved. Maybe, maybe not. You end up with a voting receipt or something to hold on to show that you've cast your vote. There's the option of you being able to do it from your home, right, from your device, and whether it's a computer, a mobile device, SMS, email, a web interface, some other application, right? That's a different form of electronic voting. How I see it being correctly implemented in similar climes that we have here in Nigeria is to offer a hybrid option where, based on the individual, they choose how they want to cast their vote, and there's a clear but transparent process of collating that information. This, I think, is a strategy that is effective because it would reduce the possibilities of disenfranchising people or causing confusion or adding all kinds of bottlenecks to the process. Because we have to understand the demographics of the people that will cast their votes. And whatever we design has to be crafted around that.
If you ask me, the problem that we have is one of political will. Because there are people who benefit from the system being archaic the way that it is, because they can control it. And because they can go into a back room and stamp a lot of ballot papers. We were sitting there on election date and a truck would come in and say, hey, they brought it from Kinikon polling unit. And there's no way for you to know for sure where did these votes actually come from. Did somebody just park on the side of the road and just stamp a bunch of ballot papers and it came from this place? So if we can do BVN, where for you to have a bank account, you need to be a registered, so there's certain things you have to have a BVN, and nobody can have two BVNs. So if we can do that, then there's no reason why we can't think about taking steps towards electronic voting.
From polling booths to collation centers, that's where the figures change. And we're still running a system where we use paper, where, look, just reflect back on national TV when one professor, I can't remember the state, was calling his figure. The same figure he wrote, I got from the collation center that he was part of. He was making mistake on national TV, or he could not even tell the figure.
I see, the case for electronic voting and how convenient it sounds. But that friction, only removing friction solves one problem. It doesn't necessarily solve the political will problem.
Already, if you remember, there's electoral reform before which the president refused to assent to it. Let's revisit that, isn't it? Let this Ninth Assembly revisit that. Let's push it to President on time so that he can assent it. All the reform that took place, let us see how we can implement it. This is very important. Say we have reform on all these things were identified in the reforms.
So why can't we have INEC on the first line charge? So their budget, their releases, even has nothing to do with, annual budget reappropriation. Let the resources come from CBN directly and goes to INEC chairman, and not wait for a presidential signature or National Assembly. Yeah, let's have the National Assembly deliberate on their budgets. Let them deliberate on their appropriation. But let's not make the process so technical that, they would have to compromise to get their job done.
2019, if everything had gone well with Nigeria, 2019 was supposed to be that super election that should have had a far higher turnout than previous elections. Why is that? Because 2019 was the first election since the return to civilian rule in which an entire generation came of age. Unfortunately, this generation that came of age in 2019 saw that their lives had gotten progressively worse. They've gotten progressively poorer, and the politicians do not care about them. They had lived through a recession, the first in 30 years, so none of them was born as of the time Nigeria had a recession before. They had lived through a recession, and they had seen their civil liberties eroded. So essentially, the process has been delegitimized in their eyes. The conditions under which we entered into the 2019 elections, if anything, have gotten worse. So, as long as we don't make any changes to at the foundation level, starting with an amended electoral act, then we are going to see less people turn out for elections. So, and once we get to that critical mass, and we're already in that range, once we get to a stage where the presidential elections have less than 20% turnout, whatever government comes as a result is not legitimate.
From the views of the citizen, that the challenges were that what they voted is not what was given to them. Meaning what they voted is not what they declared. That is why many people are saying they may not come and vote again. But civil society were doing a lot of campaigns, trying to draw attention that this is their civic rights, civic responsibility. Struggle continue. Nobody should disenfranchise them from voting, And we will continue this till the next election. And we'll make sure that all these issues that were identified would be addressed. And we will not relent our effort as a civil society in pushing for the change, in pushing for all the stakeholders to do the right thing during election. Definitely, citizens are not happy. What is happening in Nigeria. Politicians should not take election as a do or die. We should learn from what's happened in other countries. Even in Nigeria, the 2015 election, we have shown a lot of credibility in Nigeria, where the then president Goodluck Jonathan accepted defeat and handed it over to General Muhammad Buhari. Even here in Kano, during when PDP lost election to APC to Shekarau, Konkoso lost election to Shekarau, and he handed over election. Then why should we be killing ourselves for nothing? We were in Kogi for same election. What we saw in Kogi is horrible, But no, even the IG came out to say they realized that there's a fake police in the field. But no one was arrested, no one was paraded, no one was prosecuted. Then who is pulling who? Look at what happened in Bayelsa. We deploy observer from situation room over there. Is this how our election will continue? Mr. President came out. We expect the president to challenge the election, to call on the security to fish out the perpetrators. But he congratulated the two governors. That's all. I think we need to do more. We need to do better than this.
Despite being a democracy for about 20 years, the incidents encountered in 2019 point out the various issues which Nigeria needs to begin addressing before the country heads back to the polls in 2023.